Welcome to PFA's webinar series, Come Together Right Now. Conversations about the natural world, environmental policy changes, and how we can bring back a healthy planet. My name is Laurie Schneider. I'm the Executive Director for Pollinator Friendly Alliance, and it's our honor to be joined tonight by two conservation heroes, Don Shelby and Keely Cervantes. I'm going to give a 5-minute introduction followed by Don Shelby's featured talk with a short Q&A and then Keely Cervantes' presentation. And at the end, we'll provide you with useful resources and links, so please stick around. Tonight's program is brought to you by Pollinator Friendly Alliance with support from our friends at Bear Honey, a local apiarian honey company that does work for good. Pollinator Friendly Alliance is a grassroots nonprofit that protects the natural world through the conservation of pollinators in their habitats. The series of webinars aim to educate about the natural world and inspire people to take action. We can use our voice to protect planet Earth. PFA is driven by the power of volunteers and our partners, so feel free to throw a little love our way if you care to. Some may wonder what pollinator conservation has to do with environmental policy changes. Pollinators are a keystone species in an interconnected web of life, which all depend upon the other. Climate change, loss of habitat, and biodiversity have direct impacts on pollinators, birds, other wildlife, and the entire planet ecosystem. We have been warned for 40 years of climate change and how lack of biodiversity will bring on human disease. Biodiversity is as central to all life as oxygen and water. Over the last 3 years, more environmental policies have been dismantled than ever before, at a time when the planet needs critical help. Regulations and rules protecting the environment have been deemed unnecessary and burdensome and in the way of fossil fuel industry and other businesses as the president makes way for his America First energy plan. This is a short list of just some of the environmental policy rollbacks. If you're here with us tonight, I'm certain you're well aware our planet is in crisis. I grew up with the camping motto, leave it better than you found it, and made a spiritual deal to do my best and hardest work to be a protector of the natural world and the sentient beings that live here. We are all the protectors, every one of you. As human beings, sometimes we separate ourselves from nature, like nature is a commodity. But we are not just visitors here, we are part of it all. And with the historic and devastating fires in the West and hurricanes in the Gulf, these times are difficult for people and for the natural world. And there's hope. Every one of us is a bit of hope. So now is the time. We have a chance to launch a new era that starts in our communities and includes all of us to save the planet. During the pandemic, we witnessed the results of ignoring scientists and the facts. We can't afford to let elected officials make the same mistakes with the environment. Our work and our voice are more critical now than ever to protect these things that we love. So now I'm excited to hand it over to our featured speaker, who will masterfully take us on a journey where journalistic and environmental integrity begins. An award-winning investigative journalist, TV anchor, and Twin Cities public television voice dedicated to investigating energy conservation and mitigating climate change. He has 3 national Emmys and 2 Peabodys, and he's worked a lifetime to preserve the Mississippi River and continues to be a prominent voice for the environment. He's a celebrated speaker and author So welcome, Mr. Shelby. Are you ready? Let's see, unmute. You're still muted, Don.
No, I'm not.
There you go.
Thank you very much, Laurie. Technology is not my long suit. I was the guy in front of the camera. All the technology was behind me. Thank you very much for allowing me to join you this evening and to speak to an issue that's dear to my heart. Not only do I have a pollinator garden, a certified pollinator garden out front, but I was a beekeeper 12 years. The great rewards that the bees brought us in terms of honey and wax and pollen, but did it because there was something very important about connecting um, these great pollinators to the food system that we're reliant upon, a food system that is in greater and greater jeopardy if you take the word of the United Nations, a arable land uh, in size and shape of the state of Indiana disappears from the globe every year to never return to its arable status. And people are starving. Uh, and those people who are starving, which we have grown used to, uh, those people in the Horn of Africa, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia, where we hear about over the years starving people, that in the next 20 years or so, we may be hearing that there is the same kind of starvation occurring in the United States. Now, I know I'm speaking to the choir, so I'm going to dispense with the work that I do in climate communications, in trying to work with scientists so that they can themselves learn how to speak the human language as opposed to the scientific language. It's very difficult to talk about the physics of a molecule and its effect on the atmosphere when many people have not studied chemistry or not studied physics or did not do very well in those subjects. And those who did do well in the subjects were the early adopters of the philosophy that science knows better than we do. But I want to tell you that beyond the expertise of science, nature, capital N, nature knows better than we do. Nature is smarter than we are. I hate to break it to a lot of non-believers, if that's a good term. Nature is smarter than we are in almost every conceivable way. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could replicate an economic system, a food system that employed zero waste? That's what she does. She wastes nothing at all. Everything is put back to work. And so I've always been fond of considering Mother Nature as one of the higher powers that I depend on because I know that she is that intelligent. And I want to be close to that. How many, I wonder, in this audience are actual tree huggers? Literally a tree hugger. Let me take you into that story for just a moment. I was 8 years old. One summer in the backyard, I asked, as little boys often do ask their mothers, where's God? I've never seen God. And she said, well, um, God's everywhere. Um, God's in the tree. Well, she didn't realize what my limited capacity for understanding was, and she went off to do an errand, and she was gone for a couple of hours. And when she came back, she used to tell the story before she passed away. She used to tell the story. She couldn't find me, and she went around in the backyard where she had left me. And there was a shagbark hickory in our backyard, and had my arms wrapped around it. I was hugging the tree, literally hugging the tree. And I have since 15,000 miles of canoe journeys across northern Canada, the BWCA, in the Yukon territories. I have hugged trees, literally, to feel a closeness to that power, that intelligence, and to let nature know that I was a friend and not a foe. It's a great position to be in. Now, many of you may not think that that's really pertinent to this discussion, but it does require a shift in thinking that nature not only needs protected, but in a way that we don't understand, a way that I would like to be clear about. If some of you saw or read the book, if you read the Dr. Seuss book, The Lorax, and if you saw the play at Children's Theater, I saw it twice, marvelous. The Lorax spoke these words: "If I'm gone, who's going to speak for the trees?" There are a lot of us who wish to speak for nature, but our voices are small and we are divided. We have variant interests, and so we are not considered a voting bloc as we face in 36 or 37 days the next election. I wish I could change that. I wish somehow I could take everything that I understand and form a union, if it were, a union of not just conservation voters, but environmental voters, where the single thing was protection of nature. Now, I want to hasten to add something that you may or may not know. I work for an organization, where I don't get paid, but I work with an organization called Geoversive, Earth Intelligence. And one of the individuals there had traveled to Ecuador. And during the rewriting of the Constitution of Ecuador, codified into the Constitution of that country is the rights of nature. You can do away with an EPA. You can do away with the Pollution Control Agency because nature itself has standing in court. Nature is recognized the very same way that the Citizens United recognizes businesses as people. Nature is recognized. India now is toying with that idea. And in some not too distant future, I hope, the United States will begin to consider that nature itself has a right to exist. Now, here's another thing that I want you to consider, because I'm speaking to you now as a journalist, not just a nature boy. There is a division in this country, and the division is not so much on policy issues. The division that I see is a division between those people who critically think and those who do not. Critical thinking is not taught anymore. Civics is not taught anymore. No one expects the average voter to have anything more than an opinion. I spent 55 years as a journalist, and I lived in a world of fact. Fact was the lodestar, the guiding star, the North Star. It was the pole. And nothing else really mattered but the facts. Today, and I think you know this as well as I do, if you turn on any television channel, that there are a bunch of so-called experts, and they are offering opinions. Some are informed, some are not. Thomas Jefferson, when he uh, wrote to Colonel Carrington, I think it was, in 1789, said that the informed opinion is the basis of all liberty. He didn't say the opinion. He said the informed opinion is the basis of all liberty. And then that inspired me to be somebody who worked in the business of informing people. And sadly, that I've seen over the past 20, 25 years, a dissolution of the importance of the informed opinion as opposed to just the opinion, the adopted opinion of someone else, the adopted opinion of your parents, the adopted opinion of a radio personality, the adopted opinion of a political party. Not requiring an individual to actually think. When opinion rises to the same level and the degree of trust as a fact, we're in trouble. And that's where we find ourselves today. So let me try to explain what I mean by opinion versus fact. Now, it seems patently clear on its face, but the truth is it's not that clear. When a jury is impaneled for a criminal or civil case, there's a function prior to the seating of the jury called voir dire, where each individual juror from the panel is questioned. The judge sometimes asks questions, the prosecutor asks questions, the defense attorney asks questions to the plaintiff for defense. And they try to find the suitability of the juror, that they have not developed a prejudicial, preconceived notion of the guilt or innocence of the individual before the bar. Now, I've been in courts and covered court cases where strikes for causes, that is, somebody says, we don't want that juror, and then no one can object. They just dismiss the juror because the person has formed an opinion prior to hearing the evidence. Let me repeat that. A person has formed an opinion on the guilt or innocence of the individual before the bar before they have heard the evidence. And I have seen judges, after an individual says, I would like to strike for cause, just a moment, may I ask a question of the juror? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. or Ms. Juror, you say that you have formed an opinion about the guilt or innocence of the individual in this case, or the company in this case. Yet you have heard no evidence. Is your mind so made up that once presented with evidence contrary to what you have conceived, could you change your mind? And the juror often responds, well, of course I can change my mind. If I see evidence that I'm wrong, I'll change my mind. And then the judge says, seat the juror. Then after hearing the case, they send the judge back into the jury back into the deliberation room. And when they do that, the judge doesn't say, return with your opinion. No judge has ever asked a jury to return with an opinion. They ask, return with your conclusions based on the evidence presented in this courtroom. What are the facts of the case? And that you can fairly decide these things. So I try not to express opinions. I try to express conclusions. That suggests that there's been some thinking that went into it, some study that went into it, some listening that went into it, hearing the other side, listening to the lawyer for the individual you think is guilty and hearing evidence presented, say, well, maybe I was wrong. I saw a commercial the other day. Not a commercial, it was a movie. It was a beautiful movie. I wish I could call to mind its name. I can't, but this is what happened. A father had made a promise to a son that they were going to do something. And the father ended up having other obligations, and he went into the child's bedroom and said, I promised this was going. Well, I've had to change my mind. I've changed my mind. We're not going to do that. And what the boy said next was so enlightening for me. Enlightening in an intellectual sense and enlightening in a spiritual sense. It lightened my soul. The child said, Daddy, that's what minds are for. That's what minds are for. Your mind is to be changed. But we don't see that in our politics today. We don't see that in those people who espouse one policy versus another policy. No one is listening to the other side. No one's mind is being changed. I was watching CNN after the debates, and they did an instant poll. They said that one candidate won the debate and one had lost the debate. And then they went further and then did a survey to see if that had swayed any voters. It had not. Their minds couldn't be changed. So that's the realm in which we find ourselves regarding climate change, the rights of nature, our role as a part of nature, not in some duality of man versus nature, not the frontier, not taking on the deadly nature out there in the woods, but you're a part. And in the butterfly analogy, that the flapping of the wings 10,000 miles away can affect you. Everything in nature is interconnected, including us. And nature is going to win. Nature always wins. So the bad news, I have bad news and good news. The bad news is that nature will make a decision in its own way. It will cast out the parasite, that which is harming the plant. That we're not like prairie grasses, human beings, where symbiosis is the rule of the world in which they grow. One plant grows and when its roots rot, becomes the nitrogen uptake for the next. If a bug likes a certain plant, it doesn't like the plant next to it, and so it doesn't bother it. So the prairie grasses grow for eons, sending their roots down 30 feet, creating the most luscious humus, the greatest topsoil in the world. And yet, here comes humans, and we dig it up and destroy it. We don't see past the end of our nose, human beings. We see only ourselves. And the way I heard on the news the other night that I'm going to vote for the President of the United States because my 401k is doing really well. Not seeing past your nose. So I have an issue with fact versus opinion. And when it comes to the question of climate change, for instance, in which I'm deeply involved, I was in, I'm a, this will sound like bragging. I'm a listed author of the communique of the Nobel Peace Prize convention on solutions to climate change in Oslo, Norway last year, um, and at the UN at Climate Week, and the various organizations locally, the Climate Generation, George Mason's Climate Matters, um, the Great Plains Institute, working on all of these issues to try to appeal to Mother Nature, saying there are some of us who are trying. And thank goodness, the good news is, thank goodness that there is a time now when we are beginning to wake up, beginning to see facts and to eschew the uninformed opinion. To check ourselves before we say, well, I heard, and then spout some conspiracy theory. What I always would do as a reporter would say, how do you attribute that? Where did you get your information? And if a person said, oh, I have no idea, then what they just said didn't count. It wasn't a fact. If it couldn't be attributed, if it couldn't be foundationed. So in a time of debate, which I do not believe in, whether climate change is actually happening as a result of greenhouse gases entering our atmosphere and altering the chemical composition of that atmosphere so that sunlight is being trapped. I wish I could say that that's my opinion, but it's not. It's my conclusion based on the facts. And I have never met a person who denies climate change who can argue with the facts, except to say, I don't believe them, which was the case of the President of the United States. And I was sorely disappointed in the press corps. After the fourth assessment on climate change was released by his government, he was asked by the press as he was getting on Marine One on the White House lawn, did you read the report? Yeah, I did read it. Do you agree with it? No, I don't believe it, he said. No, I don't believe it, he said. Now, this maybe sounds like bragging, but just between you and I, sometimes I do that. If I had been in that White House press corps, I would have said, Mr. President, no one cares what you believe. We only care about what you know. What do you know? And that should be a question for every Republican or Democrat or independent, Green Party, Socialist Party. What do you know? What are you going to do to be a part of the change that is absolutely necessary? It's facing us right now. I've got a mustache and a goatee, quarantine COVID. That's going to pass. If we do nothing, nature is at risk. But nature is not going to pass away. Nature is going to win. Nature will remove the parasite that's trying to harm her. That's a warning that a biologist can give you. Nature's in charge, and nature is much more smart. And so I rely on nature. I once had, if you might remember when I was on television, I did a thing called Good to Know, little 1 minute piece in every evening 10 o'clock newscast. And in one of them, I spoke to that issue the issue of nature knowing more than we do, of nature winning in the end. And I got terrible, terrible phone calls from people that people are more important than nature. No, I said people are a part of nature, which they disregarded completely, did not choose to understand or did not want to understand or were too afraid to admit that that was true. What if we had an economic system that operated like nature? Symbiotically, zero waste, fecund, fertile. What if we understood that there was a sentience in nature, a built-in sentience, not the kind of sentience that the I am, therefore I am philosophy, but a sentience that you find in books like The Life of Trees, where a healthy tree will grow a root system and reach out to an ailing tree and share its nitrogen uptake to try to heal it. If you get a chance, watch a Netflix documentary. It's a new documentary on Netflix. It's called My Octopus Teacher. Um, it put a hard lump in the throat of this nature boy watching that. I'd like you to watch it. Because if we don't recognize we're part of nature, nature recognizes we are and will teach us lessons. And if I can anthropomorphize for a moment, Mother Nature is pissed off at what we're trying to do to her. And for those of you of faith who'd like to think about this great planet we have as as creation, the idea that we could improve upon creation, the idea that that mountaintop should be removed, or that we should employ the use of neonicotinoids to overspray fields, which will kill the bees, which we hope will help our cucumbers and our almonds grow. Do we even know what we're doing? The answer is largely no, we don't know what we're doing. And I had hoped at one point, and I said again in one of these episodes of Good to Know, that I thought it would be a good practice that no one could run for public office unless they had a degree in biology. I think things would be solved. A scientific approach, not a business person's approach, a scientific approach. I'm about out of time. I wanted to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I have a lot more to say, and starting a podcast next month with Geoversity of Earth Intelligence, and it will be a special discussion requiring people to actually listen, spend some time. It won't be entertaining, but it will be fact-based, as this world should be. Because if nothing else, nature is fact-based, and we can count on her. The good news is that I will leave you with is that, according to Paul Hawken, there are enough environmental movements going on in the world right now to account for at least 100 million people being directly involved or members of organizations involving the environment and its protection. That number is going to grow as climate change makes it obvious that we're at peril and that we're harming Mother Nature. And we're sticking, for those of you who are of a faith that had monotheistic, sticking a sharp stick in the eye of God and saying, what you did, this creation, ain't good enough. We're going to improve upon it. We're going to take every can from it. And I want to thank you all for giving me the time to speak to you today. And I hope you invite me back. I'll have more to say if you do. And now I think it's time for some Laurie questions and answers.
Yes, it is. So we welcome you all to put your questions in chat. You know, Don, I've sometimes said jokingly that the human animal is the most invasive species on the planet Earth, but I've never seen it on the invasive species list yet. So we've got to help ourselves. That was a very inspirational and great talk, Don. Thank you so much for that. We're going to have an opportunity for people to ask questions twice. So I know that's a lot to chew on for you all, and you can think about what you'd like to ask while we invite Keely to talk. Some compliments coming in the chat. Keely, oh, there you are. Let me introduce Keely, and then we will come back for questions again. Just here. So Keely Cervantes is Conservation Minnesota's regional manager. She works on whole ecosystem and public policy issues to bridge urban and rural communities. She advocates for clean water and healthy land. She has a background in urban agriculture and holds a MPA in public policy from NYU. She grew up amid rural Midwest farmlands. So I'm gonna welcome Keely. Are you there? Can you unmute and share your screen? No, you can't. Let's see. Let me find you.
I've got her. She's good.
Working now?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, so as Laurie said, my name is Keely and I work for Conservation Minnesota. I have a short presentation. I'm going to talk about environmental policy in Minnesota and participating in the democracy that we cherish, and how to be an informed voter and how to hold our legislative officials accountable, especially in such an important election year. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. All right. All right, so as I said, my name is Keely and I am the East Metro Regional Manager at Conservation Minnesota. So I work primarily in the East Metro, and I enjoy a little bit about myself. I have a 1-year-old baby, and I enjoy all the things that Minnesota has to offer in our 4 seasons, and that's something that I'm rediscovering as a new mom, and something that us at Conservation Minnesota are really working hard to protect. We all cherish our 4 seasons and being able to do different things outdoors, and especially during this pandemic, being able to really appreciate what Minnesota has to offer through the last 6 months or so of different things to do outside, and trying to be creative of ways that we can continue to do that in the winter, which is coming shortly. So yeah, a little bit about what we'll be talking about. And first off, about Conservation Minnesota, we're focused on building a diverse and passionate statewide network and understanding each person's unique interests. So we do that by having people who are our members and who aren't our members take our survey so that it can inform our priorities for each legislative session. So I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end. And then we match people's passions with credible information. And like Don was talking about, it's just really important to have fact-based information out there about what's happening in our legislative sessions and our local politics, our local information. So we do that to try to create positive impact for your family, for your community, for the future of not just Minnesota, but our global community as well. So we briefly have a family of organizations. Conservation Minnesota is a 501c3 nonprofit. We have a 501c4, which allows us to endorse candidates that are running for office. And then we also have a political action fund called Climate Vote Minnesota. At Conservation Minnesota, we try to really connect with different communities to work on campaigns. And some of the examples of that are the Brooklyn Park Green Space Ballot Initiative is a bond of $26 million for parks and recreation investment that was passed last year. Rochester Clean Energy Commitment, we have a regional manager in Rochester, and she works closely with the Public Utilities Commission. We worked on flame retardant bans. We updated a Firefighter and Children's Health Protection Act this year to include more chemical compounds in consumer products and children's products, upholstery, etc., to try to decrease the amount of chemicals that people are exposed to. Our CM Voter Center really tries to bring people together to solve issues of common concern, such as protecting the quality of our water, again, removing toxic chemicals and preserving public lands. And all of this really wraps up in protecting communities from the impacts of climate change. So we know that engaging broader and more diverse sets of people really means making better decisions for our collective future and bringing those priorities to the people that we elect. We also have a voting tool, which I will highlight later in the presentation. It gives all the online voting records related to conservation issues in Minnesota. So it's kind of real-time monitoring of legislative votes. And we really try to just promote legislative accountability. Lastly, the Climate Vote Minnesota PAC, excuse me. We know that winning the climate vote in 2020 will set up Minnesota for major policy advances in 2021 and 2022. We're trying to look towards the future and be optimistic. And it will create conditions for Minnesota to fulfill its role as the ongoing climate policy driver and innovator that we know we can be in the entire Great Lakes region. So a few recent legislative successes I want to highlight. The Land and Water Conservation Fund is something that in Minnesota we may have heard of, but it was combined into the Great American Outdoors Act, which is a federal bill this year that was passed and signed into law. The big thing to note about LWCF is that Minnesota's received millions of dollars over the years for places like the Boundary Waters, the Minnesota Valley Wildlife Refuge, and the Mississippi River Headwaters, which we know provides drinking water for nearly half of Minnesotans. So it's really important that it was always having to be reauthorized every year for that money. And so what happened last year was that Congress permanently reauthorized it. So the $900 million is available each year without having to be appropriated. So that's a really big deal for conservation projects in Minnesota. Next, the TCE ban that we passed this year. It was a year-long effort to ban the toxic chemical that was really brought to attention after Water Gremlin in White Bear Township was polluting for decades at a level that they were unfortunately not transparent about. So that is the first ban in a state in the country, and we are the only split legislature in the country. So it was a really big bipartisan effort and a really big bipartisan win. And then, you know, people who are interested in pollinators already know about Lawns to Lagoons, which is one of the projects approved for trust fund support during the 2019 legislative session, and to convert traditional turfgrass lawns to pollinator-friendly lawns. A big thing for us at Conservation Minnesota is really working on solutions-based policy and advocacy. So a couple of the things that I'm going to highlight have to do with really finding solutions in funding and policy, and being able to find a way to make that consistent and constant and last for not just the present. So one of the things, health of humans and wildlife alike, we all depend on clean water, and that's linked to our land practices. And as an agriculture state, some of these water issues related to agriculture are just really important for us to understand and to know about. So nitrogen-based fertilizers are used by farmers to increase crop yields. And in 2007, when high nitrate levels began showing up in wells across Minnesota, communities around the state wanted to figure out how to protect drinking water from nitrate pollution. So the Minnesota Department of Agriculture created the groundwater protection rule, which focused on reducing high nitrate levels within the vulnerable management areas of the drinking water supply. So MDA gathered input from farmers for about 3 decades before the rule became law last year. And the rule's biggest influence was in having farmers in vulnerable locations switch from fall fertilizer application of nitrogen to spring application. And so that can help to stop over application of nitrogen leaching. So with that, the groundwater protection rule is based on the Minnesota Nitrogen Fertilizer Management Plan. So all of these things are, you know, bureaucratic and they're within our state government institutions, but it's really important to see how something at that level is really impacting on the ground, literally in the water. So that plan recommends steps for the prevention of the impacts of nitrogen fertilizer on groundwater, and really emphasizes involving the local ag community in problem solving for groundwater concern, because people who are farming those communities also drink the water. So it's really important to get people who benefit and are impacted involved. And then briefly, the Agriculture Water Quality Certification Program is a way that farmers can accelerate the adoption of these practices by enrolling in this program, and they are able to get compensated to help out with their changes. So lastly, vegetative buffers are created by planting native grasses along lakes, rivers, and streams, and they're an important conservation practice to help keep our water clean. So it's a recent policy that was enacted and can help to kind of protect waterways from runoff and pollution. And a lot of the contaminants that are being found in our water because of that it helps to protect from are phosphorus, nitrogen, and sediment. So that's really important to also prevent erosion and to provide important wildlife habitat. But there's room for more solutions. So we're always working on finding the next best way to do something. The next big thing is environmental funding solutions. So a lot of this stuff is great in theory and in policy, but you need the money behind it. So Minnesota is extremely lucky to have had a few constitutional amendments passed over the years that help to promote and solidify that. So we're all probably familiar with the Legacy Amendment, but I just want to talk briefly about it because it informs a lot of our work, and Conservation Minnesota played a big role in passing it in 2008. So it's the largest state conservation measure in US history, which is also something for Minnesota to be proud of. Years before that was enacted, however, Conservation Minnesota's state budget analysis first revealed that conservation spending in Minnesota had reached a 30-year low. So in order to address this shortfall and try to further protect our natural resources, conservation groups came together to draft the amendment, which is really special. And it not only aims to protect our drinking water sources, but also just our habitats and prairies and forests and different areas of Minnesota, including our parks and trails and our arts and cultural heritage. So we just really are trying to continue to find ways to utilize those monies to the best of Minnesota's advantage. And the tax revenue is kind of distributed in those bullet points below. The last thing is the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, which receives lottery proceeds that are dedicated to the protection of outdoors and was approved by voters in 1988 as a constitutional amendment. But the lottery funds are guaranteed only until the end of 2024. So this is something that we are keeping our eye on now, working to try to reauthorize some of the structure of that and to make sure that it's protected beyond 2024 because that's coming up very quickly. And the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources makes the annual recommendations of how the trust fund dollars are spent. So the important thing about it is just to know that we and other conservation groups are dedicated to protecting these funds. And there's been some things back and forth in the legislature of approving a bonding bill for infrastructure projects that try to use trust funds to pay the debt on service on appropriation bonds, which the trust fund had never seen, had never before been used to pay interest on infrastructure bonds. So it gets a little bit in the weeds of some legislative issues, but it's important that that raid was kind of cleaned up, and we're trying to make sure that that doesn't happen and we protect those funds again for the future. So since 1991, the trust fund has provided approximately $500 million to about 1,000 projects around the state. And Minnesota's outdoor recreation economy is a $16.7 billion industry and employs 140,000 Minnesotans. So this isn't just something that, you know, environmentalists or people who like to hike are interested in or benefit from. This is something that's really important for the economy of our state. And the next thing I want to talk about is the election. So we at Conservation Minnesota identify issues and policies for candidates that can help them be environmental leaders. So we have a candidates guide, and this goes to local candidates to make sure they understand what conservation issues matter to us as Minnesotans. And candidates running for different offices receive a similar guide, and we've extended an open invitation to work with each of them. So this kind of provides background information on questions you as voters can ask candidates running for office in your local office, your state, county, etc. And I'm just going to highlight in the next few slides a couple of things in this guide. So again, talking about protecting and expanding natural resources. These are questions that you can ask, and feel free to take a screenshot, or this presentation is being recorded. So we really want you to be able to have some of these on hand to kind of familiarize yourself with some of these issues and talking points, and to be able to participate in our democracy, making sure that who you're voting for is going to vote your values when they are sitting in that high office. So it's important that we directly understand, and what I was talking about earlier, this really ties to making sure that things don't kind of get out of whack. So making sure that we're protecting the funding from future reallocation, and making sure that these projects are going to be safely protected and funded. The next one is clean water. So as I talked about before, clean water impacts all of us, wildlife, humans, and it's something that as climate change becomes more prevalent, that we really need to make sure that we're protecting with so much fresh water in the state. But however, recently, Minnesota's lakes and streams, it was 40% that were not meeting water quality standards, but the Pollution Control Agency put out a report this year that upped the number to 56% of our waterways are impaired, and a lot of that had to do with the St. Croix River. So again, with pollutants in drinking water and impacting a growing number of communities, water pollution is a threat to our core values as Minnesotans, and it impacts both urban and rural places. Rural communities do have the increased nitrate pollution in drinking water from agriculture runoff that people in the metro area don't necessarily have that same impact as much. They do, but not as much. And this tends to be seen most in private wells. The issue is that private wells are really costly to clean. So many Minnesotans end up drinking that contaminated water. And this is an equity issue. Everyone has the right to have clean water and clean air. And if we're not able to provide the most vulnerable of our population in the state with clean drinking water, then we aren't doing right by them and by us all as Minnesotans. So these questions here can really help you to, hold elected officials accountable about what they're going to do to make sure that we all have the same level footing when it comes to clean drinking water. And with that, talking about an equity issue, a lot of what we've been working on at Conservation in Minnesota More is trying to create a more inclusive environmental movement. So these questions, removing lead drinking water pipes, it's all, it might not impact us directly, but it impacts people who are our neighbors. And again, we have a lot of racial disparity. This conversation is really important to have, and it's coming up so much more. And the environmental movement needs to have this conversation in addition to the way that it's already kind of mainstream being talked about in 2020. So again, these questions can kind of help to guide some of your conversations. So quickly, I touched earlier on our vote tracker. This is a screenshot from our website, www.conservationminnesota.org. And if you go to Minnesota legislator votes up on the top, you'll be able to look at our website and see recent votes and actions for the Senate and the House in the state of Minnesota. So we really track these bills because we want to inform Minnesotans of their legislators' decisions. So one of these, just an example of what it looks like, one of the Senate files from 2019 is funding for state conservation agencies and special conservation projects. So it shows like what does this mean? Like, what is this bill? We try to break it down and really make it kind of understandable as you're just popping through some of these bills. And this is what the House one looks like. So then it tells you, and it further breaks it down if you click on it to see who voted which way, so that you can really look into what your senator or House member are doing. Another one, compensating farmers with the buffer law. So that kind of touches on what we were talking about earlier. And then what I mentioned also earlier was taking our survey. So we have a 6-question interest survey on our website. If you go on the Get Involved portion, we, at the beginning of every legislative session, we look at what people who take this survey say is important to them. We take those priorities and we also give you that information based on what your interests are throughout the year. So this year, especially with the election, it's a little bit more involved, but the legislative session in Minnesota is going to be starting again its normalcy in January. This year's been a little different because of the pandemic, but we can continue to vote and elect Minnesota's environmental champions. So it's really important that we get your opinion and we can continue to hold people accountable and also vote. Early voting is open here in Minnesota. Get your absentee ballot. We just got ours in the mail this week, and so we're going to fill it out and drop it off. If you don't want to send it in, you can figure out where to drop it off and just make sure that you're participating in this democracy. I hope that I have given you a few tools to have a little bit more information of what's happening here in the state, to kind of check in with your elected officials, figure out how to have those conversations that are really important, and just be an active participant in this really empowered and crucial and cherished thing we have in our democracy, especially this year. So that is all I have. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that, again, you come away with some crucial environmental policy information, and I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to have you email me, hop on the phone. This is me and my 1-year-old at Lake Superior. We took him up to Lake Superior over Labor Day so he could get his toes in that cold water. And he mostly liked it, but yeah.
That was great, Keely. I think it's really fun and important for people to see the watchdog work that organizations like Conservation Minnesota do, because we need our environment to be protected, and these are the people that are working for us behind the scenes. So thank you so much for your
Yeah,
work.
of course. Thank you for having me, Laurie.
I see one question here that you may be able to take. Do you see the one about the nitrogen and the millargonite? And people think it's organic, but they want to know what effects that has on. Oops, you're muted. Let's see if I can get you unmuted. Unmute.
Okay, there we go. I don't actually know the answer to that question, but Valerie, if you want to email me, again, my email is keely@conservationminnesota.org. I will do some research on that because I think that sounds really interesting. Let me write it down just to make sure that I get the right word. I grew up on a farm in South Dakota and did a lot of urban farming around the East Coast. And I am still kind of learning some of this. I know that CRP lands are really important in trying to clear and clean some of the land around waters. I know that my dad participates in that. So that's something that I can and would be willing and happy to learn more about and check in with you about that.
And if people have questions that they think of later, you can always email me or Keely. I have up on the screen right now, there's some helpful links for you to find information that will help you vote for the environment. And we will send this to you in a follow-up email. Also, I don't know if Don is still on the, is still in, but Don, there are some folks that would like to know your schedule coming up. So let's see, I'll ask you to unmute. Maybe you can just tell us a little bit about what you have scheduled.
I can do that.
Oops. I think Don is frozen. We will get that information from Don and put it in an email for you all. I also wanted to share this film. It's very important and powerful documentary on what's happening with America's public lands. It's a must-see, and it's released and it's free. It's on YouTube. Finally, I have one more announcement. Our next activity or event with Pollinator Friendly Alliance is Bumblebee Bash. So it's not a webinar, but it's a online free virtual party. And we've got a lot of really cool stuff going on. We're gonna take folks inside a beehive with a master beekeeper live on Zoom. And then we'll have some experts answering questions about sustainable landscape. So you can bring all your gardening and landscape questions to us. We have Chris Koza playing live, and then dress your dog up like a bumblebee costume, in a bumblebee costume, and some other things too. So I'll send that link to you, and that's October 3rd. Keely, do you have any final points or thoughts you'd like to share?
I don't think so. Again, please feel free to email me questions and please vote if you haven't already. I love that Minnesota does early voting because lots of people have already gotten a chance to participate.
Yes, and I voted today. I forgot my sticker, but it was super easy. You can go to your voting place now or anytime before November 3rd, and they'll just give you a ballot. You fill it out, they put it in the voting box, and you're done. It took me 5 minutes. And the beauty of that is those votes will be counted 2 weeks before the election and tabulated and announced on the day of the election. So there's no threat of your vote not being counted after if you mail it in and it doesn't get there on time. So it's a great way. Just go in now, 5 minutes to vote.
And if you do absentee mail-in voting, you can track it online. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions that it'll just be lost in the mail, but you can track it. And so then you know that it's been accepted and counted. And if not, then you can contact the Secretary of State's office or vote in person.
Oh, Don's back. Don, can you tell us when your next events are, your next talks and your podcast?
Yes, I can. I will be doing the last for each week for the next year with Geoversive Earth Intelligence, working on the 16 SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals around the country. We'll have lots of guests, but it will not be scientific so much as it will be economic, because I think the science is a settled matter. Those people who do not believe in the science will not believe in the science. And I haven't written them off entirely, but their eyes will not deceive them, because sooner or later they will have to admit it, that it's happening to them in one way or another, through higher costs for their insurance, through devastating floods, droughts, fires, hurricanes. This is an angry Mother Nature who's going to teach us one way or another that we have to do what is proper for this planet and for what she's provided for us. I have lots of talks. I'm growing weary of Zoom talks. I can't wait to get back into the arena where I can actually see people. It's very difficult to give a speech when you can't see the reaction of people. Giving a canned speech is a little difficult. I generally wander when I give speeches into areas where I see people leaning forward. Then I will go long on that subject, and when they start to lean back, I know I've lost them. So I will, through you, if you don't mind, Laurie, answer in greater detail. I want to just mention, if you still have me, Milorganite is made from human waste sludge. It's microbes that suck up all the nitrogen that's bubbled through the system, and it's pelletized and dried and sanitized. And it's used primarily for lawns. And if you're worried about the nitrogen runoff in wastewater soil on your streets into lakes and streams, then I suggest you do what is recommended by just about every horticulturist around and every master gardener, and that's build rain gardens at the edges of your lawn, so that nothing you put on your lawn ever leaves your lawn. And there was one question on the chat, and that had to do with my house, which is a LEED Platinum house. It's the highest rated energy efficiency house in the state of Minnesota. Geothermal solar, and about an R70 factor. It's a very tight house. I have to pump air into the house to breathe. It is so tight. And I've been here now 10 years. It is absolutely wonderful. I am a fan of Franklin Roosevelt. If you read Douglas Brinkley's book on the Roosevelts, Franklin Roosevelt hired Gifford Pinchot, who was Teddy Roosevelt's Department of Interior, the first one in forestry, to come out to Hyde Park and create this wonderful, beautiful place that you can visit in New York on the Hudson. And he introduced himself at the UN not as President of the United States. He said, "I'm Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I'm a tree planter." And that's what I do as well. I have in my refrigerator right now more than 1,000 nuts that I'm stratifying for spring planting. And I'm going to be planting all of those trees And every year, I hope, as long as I live, I'll plant at least 1,000 by myself. And I'm a tree planter because I want to participate with nature. Want to be a part of it. So the house is surrounded by rain gardens, and I also have a cistern that collects every drop of rain that falls on my roof, goes into a cistern. Then I use that water. And I will also tell you that I have pervious pavers that allow for all of the groundwater that falls on the hardscape to sink into the aquifer and replenish the water that has fallen on the lawn. So my goal was that every drop of water that falls on my property stays on my property and never runs off into the lakes or the streams.
That's amazing. I want your house.
And it's a house that looks like you want to live in it, without being a critic, an architectural critic. Many of the houses that are called net zero or LEED platinum look like they've been designed by a Martian.
Oh no. Did Don freeze again? Well, we will send you all the
farmhouse, but you're
back. You're back. Well, I think
okay.
I think we should send everybody your schedule in an email, Don, so they can tune into your podcasts and participate in your talks. And hopefully someday we'll be able to do those live again.
I would be obliged if you did that, and I will try to get that information to you as soon as possible. I did have there have been 122 cancellations because of COVID. So I just got a cancellation for July of 2021.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Keely and Don. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. You are conservation heroes. And without people like you, where would we be at, really? So I am going to say goodnight and stay tuned for the next webinar, which we haven't scheduled yet, but we will.